what this is doing is, first of all, it's putting the farm workers at grave risk, but now you're also creating the conditions for all these hidden outbreaks in rural areas, which of course have also in the last 15 years been completely decimated in terms of rural healthcare. So it's not a pretty picture, but at the same time, we did talk to farm workers who are fighting this, who are advocating for their rights, including undocumented farm workers who are speaking out against farmers who are not providing them with PPE, who are not providing them with a proper education, who won't guarantee that they'll have sick leave or pay if they get infected. So it's very important that we don't just see these farm workers as victims, because a lot of them are very outspoken and demanding their rights despite all the risk to them.
There's a freight train rolling right through the heart of town. Freight train rolling right through the heart of town. You know it's picking up speed, boys, it ain't slowing down. Now when you hear that whistle, man, you better clear the track. When you hear that whistle blow, you better clear the track. With that big train rolling, it ain't coming back. There's a freight train rolling, 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 rolling on down the line.
Hello and welcome to Counterpunch Radio. My name is Eric Draitzer. Thanks so much for tuning in, coming back to the show. First time listeners finding the show, welcome. Boy, we're living in exciting and dangerous and troubling and all kinds of adjectives to describe these times. We're living through history. I think we all understand that to some extent. And it's all the more critical that as we do, we support the independent media outlets that we trust to provide the kind of critical analysis that we need to make sense of all of this madness. Counterpunch really is one of those. Counterpunch needs your support as always. If you agree with the importance of supporting Counterpunch, please do consider becoming a subscriber. We're finishing up the fund drive. It's probably over by the time you're hearing this, but I will just ask you to make a donation through the PayPal or get a subscription. You'll have access to the new subscriber only content coming in July. And it's also a great way to keep a very important media project going. Also, just as a side note, you can find my other work at my Patreon page. That's patreon.com/Eric Draitzer. Podcasts, articles, commentaries, a whole lot more stuff, including, if I remember correctly, an interview with this guy who's on the show with me this week. He's a friend of the show. He's one of America's truly greatest journalists, in my opinion. Arun Gupta is back with us. Arun is, as I said, a very important journalist to be following. His work is all over the place: Washington Post, Daily Beast, Raw Story, Intercept, The Nation, and of course, our humble little corner here at Counterpunch. He is working on a long-term project that is very exciting, a book entitled Bacon as a Weapon of Mass Destruction, a junk food loving chef's inquiry into taste. And now the exciting project on Instagram, Apocalypse Chow, cooking in end times. Wonderful, wonderful recipes to see there as well from a great chef. Arun Gupta, welcome back to the show.
So good to be with you, Eric. And if I may return, the admiration, you're really one of the people that I always look to in terms of what your take is on a situation, because you're consistently insightful, saying things no one else is.
Thanks for that, Arun, and right back at you. So, I mean, as I said in the intro there, we all understand that we're living through a historically important moment. I think that's one of the unique things about this is that I think we're all cognizant of it. So I'm just going to start there. I mean, in the last 48, 72 hours, Arun, we've seen tremendous developments. We've seen protests all over the country. We've seen protests in DC right up against the fence of the White House. We've seen tear gassing. We've seen quasi declaration of martial law, a somewhat call to arms for fascist militias from the President of the United States. Give me your initial analysis of all of this.
I think from a historical perspective, the way we sum it up is Donald Trump is bringing the war on terror home. We don't talk about the war on terror, but basically everything that he's doing, we can see that George Bush did in the 2000s, and to a lesser degree, Obama did in terms of stoking these conflicts, the way that the U.S. Essentially stoked a civil war within Iraqi society. Of course, there were these fault lines, just like there are these, racial and class fault lines in America. But we took these fault lines and essentially turned it into this civil war that both involved religion, but was also very much about, class in terms of who controlled the resources of the Iraqi state. But, Trump's governing strategy, if we look at it, and he told us from the very beginning who we were. The problem was the media wouldn't believe their own lying eyes. That he was going to sow division, he was going to sow group hatred, he was going to use chaos as a tool of governance. So, that moment in 2015, from the very beginning, Mexican immigrants are rapists, drug dealers, and criminals. He made it clear exactly what he was going to do. And then, throughout the campaign, I want a Muslim ban. We're going to create a Muslim registry. We're going to round up and deport millions of immigrants. He's making it clear we're going to do ethnic cleansing. And then on the other side, it's all about this ethno nationalist state, right? Make America great again is just a code for make America white again. Again, his campaign was explicit about it. On their website, they had information about how we're going to get immigration back to the historic lows, which would mean getting rid of half the immigrants in this country. And it's just like, you can deport about, if you rounded up every undocumented immigrant, maybe you could get rid of 20-25%. How do you get rid of the rest? Well, there's the Muslim bans, the refugee bans, but they have also been trying to actually strip immigrants of citizenship, as we know. So this was really chaos, was a strategy. So when we fast forward to 2020, it's really, in one way, no one could predict this. Like, right, I don't think there's a novelist, a writer alive who could have just whipped up this insanity that we're seeing. And as thinking of that show, that fictional show that came out on the BBC last year called Years and Years. If folks saw it, it's a 6-part series. It's not very good in my opinion. It tries to project out what happens in a 15-year time span as like British society like completely starts to fragment, and you have this Trump-like character who comes to power and is stoking hatred and ethnic strife. And the thing is, what they imagine in 15 years does not even come close to what we've seen in just the last few months, right? If Trump is all about making America great again, well, we've got the civil unrest of the urban unrest of the 1960s. We've got the economic collapse of the 1930s. We've got the great pandemic of World War I. You've got these like fascist clowns, the Boogaloo Boys and all these other militias who are trying to stoke a civil war. And and then you have essentially this kind of like Klansmen in chief, just creating these like sadistic, buffoonish moments, such as attacking his own people just to have a sword and cross photo op, which is basically something out of early 20th century European fascism.
Indeed. And so one has to wonder what the utility of all of this is, because on the one hand, it seems to have backfired tremendously if you look at if you look at the reactions from some people publicly. But then you have to start to ask yourself, think about all of the other times that things have seemed to have backfired on Trump, and you have to wonder, did it backfire? Was this a misread on his part in terms of what he could accomplish with the military and so forth? Or is there something more to this strategy, Arun?
Well, I mean, it's yes, you can see things backfire on Trump because he'll immediately start to backpedal and he'll be like, "It was a joke," or "It's the fake news." So with the when he was saying that let's inject disinfectants. I mean, it's just like, you know. There is this dichotomy to Trump. He is, in a way, an absolute genius. He's the biggest narcissist and the most malignant narcissist in human history. But he is this genius at manipulation, at like psychological terrorism. But he has no book learning or erudition. So he just says the craziest shit, like, "Hey, why don't we use a nuclear bomb to stop a hurricane?" Where he actually proposed that, or why don't we inject like bleach and Lysol into people to clear their lungs out of COVID-19? And when he becomes a laughing stock, then he's just like, "This is a fake news. That was just a joke." And so with like uh, this attacking his own people, or the looting and shooting, right? That was the same thing when he tweeted out. It just like, "This is the fake news." Is I was just talking about what might happen. I wasn't threatening anyone. Where he clearly threw fuel on the fire. This is what caused the protests to explode around the country. But in a way, to me, what's kind of interesting is I mean, I think what a lot of people don't get is, I mean, this guy is clearly he is a fascist in every single way. Now, that he's bumbling, incompetent, and clownish, right? But bumbling, incompetent, and clownish fascism is still fascism. So, when he deploys the military, when they have military helicopters being used against American citizens, where they're like dropping to tree level to create, so much turbulence to scatter people. This is like third world dictatorship stuff that we're seeing coming out of them, and then they immediately try and walk it back, like now they're trying to blame it on Barr, where it's just like, yeah, it's just like, is it Barr came up with this idea? This is, of course, all of Trump's doing. So he does constantly overreach, but I think what's disturbing is like how he keeps recovering, and it's just like America is a country that is just completely gone off the rails. That I think like about at least one third of this society is basically insane. um,
Oh, there's no doubt about that. I one third is mighty optimistic of you. Um, But that being said, we do see something happening here. Look, you've been around activism and social justice work long enough to know the difference between a momentary blip and something that might have the potential to fundamentally alter the political calculus. And it does seem that we're going through something that's more akin to the latter. You have corporate boards issuing emails to tens of thousands of employees about white supremacy and about understanding the empathy and all of these type of things. Whether that's relevant or not, it's neither here nor there. But the fact that this is permeating through society, and the fact that Trump has, as you said, thrown gasoline on the fire, has in many ways forced a conversation to be had in just the last few days.
Yeah, I mean, I don't. So let me try and do this real quick because I don't want to digress too much because I've been having variations on this exact conversation. So I think it's a great point that you raised. Sure, we're having conversations, individual attitudes do matter, having these difficult discussions, but racism is not rooted in the attitudes. That's not, we have to look at the political economy of this. And what they're rooted in is the interrelation between private property and policing. And so the way I, I if I let me just give this one quick anecdote. I was at this party out on Long Island, total like kind of like lower income, 100% white working class neighborhood. Some people I knew. Neighbor runs over, all agitated, because there's a house for sale, and an African American couple came by to look at it, and he starts ranting about how he's going to make sure they never live in the neighborhood, and if he has to buy the house, he's going to buy it himself before he lets them move it into the neighborhood, lets them, and of course, he would be like, I'm not a racist, but what the racism is like structured in is that's like there is this perception, and you can be the most like you know woke white person, but there's this perception if an African American moves into your neighborhood, the property value is going to go down. And you can say, I don't think that way, but I know some of my neighbors do. And there's studies that show, and I don't remember what the number is, but I think it's about 15 to 20% when a white middle class neighborhood gets about 15 to 20% African American middle class homeowners, it almost flips in an instant to all African American because there starts to be this perception. And, I believe this is also, I might be wrong, but this is what blockbusting is, that real estate agents do, where they actually try to drive down the values of homes by playing on the perception. That it's going to become an African American neighborhood, so then they can buy it on the cheap and then sell it back on inflated prices to the African Americans because people's economic lives are completely rooted in the value of home, both forwards for going forward in their lives and then going to their descendants' lives, right? So your home is just like that's how you year to year you take your nice trips, right? You get your home equity lines because the value's increasing. It's going to be your retirement savings. If something happens to you, you can essentially sell the home and go into a nursing home, or use the money to pay for long-term health care, get a reverse mortgage or second equity line. Plus, that value of your home is also that's what you give to kids to pay for the marriage, to put a down payment on their home for college education for them. And this is why the destruction of black wealth under Obama is so significant. The destruction of housing wealth for African Americans, which was the greatest in U.S. history under Obama. So this is how racism is reproduced, and you can be the most non-racist person, but you are incentivized to be completely racist because you're like, well, I'm not racist, but if you think some of your neighbors are, and everyone of course thinks some of their white neighbors are racist, then you're going to be like, yeah, maybe if they're black people moving into my neighborhood, we need to move out of this neighborhood, and the quality of the schools are going to go down because once the property values go down, then that's less money for the schools. And so we can have all these memos, we can have all these conversations that we like, but if we don't get at the root of this, And the other side of this is the policing, right? Where we saw with what was her name, Amy Cooper in Central Park, that white people treat police like their own personal concierge service to keep black people in line, right? So the police are there to like police black people in suburban areas to keep them, you don't belong here type thing. And if any black person is seen as being uppity, white people will call the cops. That's why we have all these videos in the last 4 or 5 years, like barbecue Becky or permit Patty or cart Gail, and
Oh, I love golf cart Gale.
the whole, and it's just like that's why we see video. This has always been going on, just like police killings. It's just now with the fact that everyone has a high tech, high quality surveillance and recording device in their pocket, we can start to actually capture a few of these moments that start to be like, hey, this is a pervasive problem, but we're still not getting at what the real root of the problem is. And if we're going to like really just get at the foundations of racism, we have to do away with private home ownership. Right? We need to completely get rid of. We need to have social housing, and we need to stop basing schools being based on property value. I mean, first of all, that should be unconstitutional. That is not equal protection, under the law. When we are depriving all these children. Of a decent education just because the property values where they live tend to be low. So yeah, sure, let's have this conversation, but we're not going to change it without addressing the political economy of racism in this country.
Now that is the kind of answer that warms my Marxist heart when I hear you talking in material terms in this way. No, absolutely. I think that's very well said. And speaking of um, ticking time bombs of racial discrimination that intersect with economic and other issues. I really appreciated your most recent piece, Arun. I would direct everybody to "In These Times" headline: "The food industry's next COVID-19 victims: migrant farm workers." Excellent piece. You co-authored with Michelle Fawcett. Why don't you tell us a little bit about some of the research that you did, what you found about what's going on with the migrant farm workers in the pandemic?
Yeah, so everyone's familiar with. There's been these outbreak in meat processing plants across the country. Over 100 plants, scores of deaths, something like over 15,000 infections. It's a workforce of, I believe, somewhere around a half million workers. And this is a heavily Latino workforce, some undocumented, but mainly illegal immigrants and U.S. citizens. And what it turns out is, one, you have a workforce that is has really limited rights in a lot of ways. Sure, there are unions in some areas, but this is an industry where there's been massive consolidation, speed up, de-skilling, and so people don't really feel like they have a right to protest the conditions. There's just all these stories like, if people like say something, if the workers say something, the supervisors, or if you don't like it, will replace you, right? Often the meat processing plants almost always tend to be in low income rural areas where there are not a lot of jobs. They pay semi decently, better than the Walmart, and there is a bit of unionization, so you might get some benefits. Maybe you're getting paid like 13, 14, $15 an hour in some rural area in Iowa where the minimum wage is still 7.25 an hour. So there, it's the working conditions, but the reason I bring the social stuff into it, because we got to remember, if the workers had rights and were able to exercise them, we wouldn't see such terrible working conditions. So when it's cold, that you can't do anything about, right? You have to keep a meat processing plant cold, but the coronavirus thrives in cold areas. Now, what you could do stuff about is the workers work shoulder to shoulder. They're packed in tightly. It's high speed. They're expected to just like churn out like tons of meat products every day. So they're working very hard. They're breathing heavily. They're exerting. Then you also have like these, aggressive ventilation systems that are just, swirling the air all around. And so you have meat processing plants where there's like 700 workers who are infected. So they become these hotspots. Now, with farms, it's the living conditions that are making them the hot spots. So, farm workers, obviously, they're working in the field. Often, they are also working shoulder to shoulder, because if you've been on a modern farm, the rows are every inch of space is maximized, and so the people who are picking your strawberries and lettuce, they're just a couple of feet away from each other, and then you have like, I mean, the way farming is now, you have these factory machines that are in the field, where they have like these complete bagging stations as this machine is slowly moving through the field, at like 1 or 2 miles an hour, as the workers are like harvesting the lettuce, and then you have all these other workers who are like bagging it up right there. It's all highly, it both depends on a lot of physical manual labor, and at the same time is highly automated. The real problem is so we have 2.5 million farm workers. A high proportion of them are migrant farm workers. So they travel from harvest to harvest. Now, about 10% of them are H2A workers. So these are workers who come in from out of the country. They're bought in by farmers, and they live in really just really shitty conditions. They're something like, so North Carolina, for instance, by law, they only need to have 50 square feet of space per farm worker. So my bedroom in New York City, it's like 200 square feet, and it's like, it's decent. It's not huge. And I'm like, you're telling me that four people could live in this bedroom? And, they only have to have like one shower head and one toilet, right? One shower head for 10 workers, one toilet for 15 workers. But then you get this situation where the showers and toilets look like they're out of a prison, because you'll just see like this concrete like box with like three or four shower heads, or another concrete box with like, four or five toilets all just lined up next to each other. So they pack them in these tight conditions, and this is what is causing the spread of coronavirus. Now, with the farm
Slave
workers,
slave quarters.
it's it's
Slave
it's
quarters.
it's pretty bad. Yeah, yeah. And so estimates range from, the I believe it's either I think it's a USDA estimates 48% of these 2.5 million farm workers are undocumented, but farm worker advocacy groups think that it could be up to 70% or more who are undocumented. And remember, these we're also often talking people who've been living in the US 10 or 20, 30 years, even if they're undocumented. So they live in these conditions, and but because they're undocumented, they're very afraid of getting fired. Right? They have the Supreme Court like gives undocumented workers almost no rights within the workplace, and has legalized the firing of undocumented workers agitating for union, their rights. Like the Supreme Court has outright said, yeah, that's perfectly legal, that you're not protected. Not that workers have much protection in the first place, right? Even though it's illegal to fire workers for protected union activity, tens of thousands of workers every year are still fired because of this. So they're afraid if they get infected, they're going to lose their jobs. So and then on top of this is all the cultural issues, right? They don't speak Spanish. A lot of undocumented farm workers, particularly H-2A workers, Spanish is a second language for them, right? They're Mayan. They speak some sort of like Mayan, like Quechua or Mam or some other language. So they may not even be fluent in Spanish. So this gets a huge becomes a huge barrier to even educating them about, here's how you protect yourself, getting them information about testing. You have in these rural areas drive up clinics, but what good does that do? These undocumented workers, they don't have a car. Often their cell phone is, by the minute. A lot of these testing facilities, I think virtually all of them require documentation. They say you need an ID to get tested, and it's just like, okay, you're creating all these barriers, even if they did want to get tested. But then there's other factors that disincentivize them even to get tested, because one is the fear, if they get tested, they'll get fired. If you get fired, you lose your job. You lose your housing. If you're an H-2A worker, that means you'll be deported. You'll be sent back to your country, and you'll fear getting blacklisted. And then understandably, there's also like other members of the crew don't want to have, there's discrimination if you get tested because they're afraid of getting infected, or they're afraid they'll lose their jobs. So one farm worker advocate actually told us, and this term is what the advocates are using, not the farm workers, but they said that the farm workers are forming death packs, and what that means is they're not going to reveal they have an infection, because they don't want everyone else to get fired on their crew. So maybe they'll just try to tough it out, or maybe they'll just quit and try and go elsewhere. But what this is doing is, first of all, it's putting the farm workers at grave risk, but now you're also creating the conditions for all these hidden outbreaks in rural areas, which of course have also in the last 15 years been completely decimated in terms of rural healthcare. So it's not a pretty picture, but at the same time, we did talk to farm workers who are fighting this, who are advocating for their rights, including undocumented farm workers who are speaking out against farmers who are not providing them with PPE, who are not providing them with proper education, who won't guarantee that they'll have sick leave or pay if they get infected. So, it's very important that we don't just see these farm workers as victims, because a lot of them are very outspoken and demanding their rights despite all the risk to them.
We have to go to break, but before we do, just to finish this point, because I think it's important that in addition to the grave danger that they're being put in by virtue of what you described, I think correctly, as these sort of hidden outbreaks, is the fact that these people are already at grave risk by virtue of the work that they do. A lot of them already come down with respiratory conditions because of the pesticides, because of the working conditions within which they're, basically working whatever it is, 6, 7, 8 months a year. Now, add to that this respiratory disease, COVID. You see, I think what we could end up seeing is not only these hidden outbreaks, but we could end up seeing hidden death tolls that are going to be completely ignored because it's simply not going to be recognized as
Yeah,
such.
yeah, and I do want to just also point out so we documented outbreaks in upstate New York, where I know you're just north of the city, but in the Finger Lakes region, there's been outbreaks at a dairy farm, at a nursery, and a greenhouse. 170 workers, half the workforce, were tested positive because the secondary contract labor was housing them 4 to a motel room, 2 to a bed. And the workforce was from Mexico and Haiti. At least 5 farms in North Carolina. There are farms in Florida with the coalition of Immokalee workers, where there's all these workers who are testing positive. I've heard of reports in Tennessee. Then on the West Coast, a lot of it is also, you'll find that various rural counties are not reporting specific farms, but they'll say, like, 40% of infections are among farm workers. So obviously there's been big outbreaks, like Monterey County in California, which is the Salinas Valley, which is the John's east of Eden. The John Steinbeck novel is about the Salinas Valley where he grew up. So there's been like a lot of infections there. In Woodburn, Oregon, it's the epicenter of the infections in the state. It's a farm worker region. In the Yakima Valley, now in Washington, where something I think like half the apple crop in the U.S. comes from, or at least comes from Washington state, there have been all these outbreaks in the fruit packing houses. But what's great there is that there have been all these strikes as well. So, so if you just Google like Yakima, farm worker strikes, you'll find articles about all the strikes that are going on there. So it's important that we recognize, that they're really fighting for their rights and need your support. So, but check out the article, and we're going to have more reports coming at it in these times on the farm workers. And, this may end up rippling through the food chain, just as we're seeing these shortages with meats. We may start to see shortages with various types of fruits and vegetables in the next few months. No one's going to starve, but you might end up eating a lot of like bread and peanut butter.
They'll pry their kumquats from my cold dead hand, Arun. All right, let's take a break. On the other side of the break, I want to talk a bit more about another important issue that you've posted, I think, on social media about, but I think it's worth discussing for our audience. So stick with us. On the other side of the break, we'll continue with Arun Gupta. You're listening to Counterpunch Radio. We'll be right back.
Here to laugh, love, fucking drink liquor, and help the damn revolution come quicker. Laugh, love, fucking drink liquor, and help make a revolution. I'm here to laugh, love, fucking drink liquor, and help the damn revolution come quicker. Laugh, love, fucking drink liquor, and maybe make a revolution. Now this thing finna end in fisticuffs, but if you got to, go ahead, twist it up. That's your job finna make you piss and cuss, make you have to hustle rent with your pistols up. Now if Uncle Sam Obama's in his murder gang, we gon' rise out the ash like that bird of flame, hoping you take action from the word I bring. But if the police ask, you never heard my name. 5 years old, eyelids half mask, bedtime is 8 p.m., it's half past. Try to take me to bed, I make the mad dash. Scared in my sleep, I miss what had passed. Quarter century later, I'm still not sleeping. If I'm not involved, I feel I ain't breathing. If I can't change the world, I ain't leaving, baby. That's the same reason you should call me this evening. To laugh, love, fucking drink liquor, and help the damn revolution come quicker. Laugh, love, fucking drink liquor, and help make a revolution. I'm here to laugh, love, fucking drink liquor, and help the damn revolution come quicker. Laugh, love, fucking drink liquor, and maybe make a revolution. I'm finna take shots and make a mark, not just take shots and make us mark. That's how they make us marks. We got dry to see the whole system break apart. We finna drive to the lake and park. Before we start, here's a club smelling like sweat, rum and perfume. She letting out whoops cause they playing her tune. If we could, we would stay here till it turned noon. Tell the sky we exist and resume. It's Millennium 3, we call it a cup. It's a world conversation, I'm hollering stuff like we done wallow them up and squalor enough. Who's the culprit? Follow the buck, I'm just following up. Cause like me, you got to be in the middle of it, unraveling the riddle of it. And to do that, you gon' ride on the powers of be. Well, I'm finna ride with you, take me home in a little bit. Laugh, love, fucking drink liquor, and help the damn revolution come quicker. Laugh, love, fucking drink liquor, and help make a revolution. I'm here to laugh, love, fucking drink liquor, and help the damn revolution come quicker. Laugh, love, fucking drink liquor, and maybe make a revolution.
I'm not just Jack Jones. We up against the wall. We can't just talk about it.
And we're back here on Counterpunch Radio chatting with Arun Gupta. Again, Arun's work is top notch. You got to find it wherever it is. Most recently, we've been talking about his recent piece in These Times. Please do follow Arun, support him. He's also on Patreon. I would recommend going to Patreon and supporting his work there. Now, Arun, before the break, we were talking about the migrant workers and the issues related to that. And that, of course, is something that you've been working on professionally in recent weeks. But I also saw you posting on social media about another issue that I find to be really important to discuss and to discuss publicly. And that has to do with the chaotic nature of the kind of uprisings that we're seeing, and specifically the kind of rumor mongering that often happens. Rumors spreading like wildfire, rumors of this action or that action, this group coming or this group, agitating or whatever it is. Talk to me a little bit about your experiences. You've reported on the far right quite a bit. You've reported on a lot of these sorts of issues. Talk to me about that and how that's relevant to what we're going through right now.
Definitely. Could I just do one quick follow up to the farm worker stuff we were just talking about?
Oh,
Yeah,
sure.
the
Yeah,
reason,
of
because I
course.
said no one's going to starve. Yeah, it's just like starvation is when you have like just utter complete breakdown and famine. But we're seeing this massive rise in food insecurity. It's estimated that 54 million Americans are food insecure now, because we've seen this complete breakdown in food supply chains, and with kids home from school, the biggest provider of meals in this country is not McDonald's, it's the school breakfast and lunch program. And there's millions of children who they were getting one or the only two meals they would eat a day at school, and that is now descended into complete chaos. So it's estimated that one third of African American children may be now food insecure, which is going hungry. And I was just talking to a friend who's that's happening to some relatives of his girlfriends that he knows, that it's just like these kids may go an entire day without food, which is just an utter tragedy in a country that children are going hungry. And this, of course, it just doesn't affect you psychologically. It stunts your growth, stunts your mental development, and this is just a real tragedy to see this happening in the richest country, society in human history. But on the question you asked about rumor mongering, yeah, so there's what's been going on is the moment the unrest started in Minneapolis, we started to see this narrative spinning out, and there are two different narratives about the nature of these protests. And of course, from Trump and the right wing Fox News and kind of these like what I call fasci propagandists on Twitter. I'm not even going to name them to give them any more support. Is to say like this is violent Antifa, and even that like Antifa has all these. There's like one lunatic who has a pretty big following, who's just like Antifa, anti-fascists have all these hundreds of cells, and this is their plan for revolution, which is of course absurd in so many ways. One is just like Antifa is not an organization, and it's incredibly decentralized. And secondly, if you have any familiar with anarchism in America, and a lot of them are brave, a lot of them are great, but organization is not their strong point. Let's be honest. So the idea that there's like this national organized movement that is going to engage in revolution against the U.S. government is just, it's a total fascistic lie to justify a crackdown. Now we see also this other narrative that's coming from Democrats, which is so we've seen the mayors of Minneapolis and St. Paul and the Minnesota state governor, all Democrats, and this has been amplified by I think some really just reprehensible media figures like Joyanne Reed. She's who I think is a pretty dishonest figure over at MSNBC. That it's basically at first, I mean, it was so absurd. It's just like it's white anarchists, white nationalists, drug cartels, and foreign elements. Like within like a day or two, the mayor of Minneapolis was blaming the unrest there on that, and it's just like, oh, really? Right? Okay, that's quite a hodgepodge. And the mayor of St. Paul said something similar, and then he walked it back. You know, he said 80% were out of state, and then reporters, and thankfully there are still a few news organizations left, went and checked the booking records at the jails there, and 83% were in state of the arrests. And so he is just like, oh, the cops, like, you know, gave me incorrect information. And it's just like, no, this is propaganda, right? You know, the police use psyops. They use military psychological operations against the people who live in this country. And, you know, the defense secretary, Trump's defense secretary, Esper, slipped and basically admitted this. He referred to dominating the battle space, right? So, oh, so we are the enemy now. And, you know, to go back to this whole war on terror thing, that they actually think like we're insurgents, and now they're trying to. So the Pentagon tried to portray the homegrown resistance in Iraq from the beginning. It's only later where you start to get the Islamist militants who come in. They, from the beginning, started to call them AIF. They even like would just refer to them as an acronym, anti-Iraqi forces. And it just like, I mean, just the absurd irony of just like, you're the invading foreigners from 10,000 miles away who know nothing about the language, who know nothing about the culture, who illegally bombed and invaded this country, and you're calling the people who live here who are resisting the anti-Iraqi forces. And it's pretty much the same way with the cops. Like, look, who are the white nationalists? They're the police. Okay, the police department. They're either like often they're explicit white nationalists. For instance, in the Portland Police Department, there's been this controversy for years that one of the top officials is an outright neo-Nazi. The Captain Kruger, I think, you know, which is a high-ranking official in the police department. He was caught creating this Nazi memorial to fallen SS soldiers. He was nailing up plaques to trees in a park in Portland. And not only was his record expunged, the city ended up like paying him $10,000 and promoting him. You know, and it's just like, but a lot of cops are basically like soft white nationalists, right? They see, as we talk, is their job is to rule the color line. They may not have like, you know, an identity Europa or, you know, an Aryan Nation tattoo, but there's still very much enthralled with the ideology of white nationalism. They come from outside the city. They don't live in these cities. So if you want to talk about outside extremists who are committing the violence, it's the cops. And, you know, we've just seen this absolutely just all these videos of just like horrifying violence. You know, there's now over 100 documented cases of journalists being attacked. There are dozens of videos where cops are outright attacking journalists. Then you see these videos where cops are shooting people point blank in the face with less lethal munitions. And the reason they're less lethal is because they're less lethal than bullets, but they can still kill. So they very much view the people as the enemy. But the problem is we have the Democrats Democrats who are now promoting this propaganda that, oh, there's all these like infiltrators and white nationalists and white anarchists. And it's just like, first of all, anarchists have as much reason as anyone to hate the cops, right? Cops brutalize anarchists, they brutalize Antifa. Secondly, it's just like, you know, so some buildings are getting burned. So what? I don't care if 10,000 Targets and Louis Vuitton stores and, Sprint mobile stores go up in flames. They matter less than one black person, George Floyd, being killed. Property is not the same as people. So, let's make it clear what's going on here. You know, then let's deal with the thing about white nationalists. So there's a lot of misinformation, and I've been like, talking to a lot of people who make these wild claims about like white nationalists, especially in Minneapolis, that there's like, they're people are like they're riding around and they're shooting people and burning POC owned businesses. And as soon as I start to say, like, okay, where's the evidence for this? They immediately start to backpedal. And so there's one guy who like made that specific claim that white nationalists are shooting people and burning down POC businesses. And after a series of back and forths, what he finally just like, what did you see? Don't tell me what stories you heard. What exactly did you see? He's like, well, I saw some dudes lounging in a pickup with a 3%er bumper sticker, which is this white nationalist militia. And then he is like, and I saw like four Proud Boys. They had the Fred Perry polo shirts on, slow rolling down the street, harassing some black youth. And I'm like, okay, that you realize that's not like shooting people or burning down businesses. And I've done this a number of times now. Like people will make these wild claims, but once you start to like, like, what did you see? What exactly did you see? Describe it. Don't give me your interpretation. Just tell me what actually you saw. Those claims start to fall apart, and this is why reporting really matters. This is what reporters do. It's just like you have to have verification. And I see so many people, including some journalists, who are just like going on hearsay and stories, and I'm just like, this is really irresponsible. This is really dangerous, because what you're doing is you're turning the movement against itself. And if you're like going on about outside agitators and outside extremists, I'm like, you realize you don't sound that different from Southern segregationist sheriffs who are like, outside agitators and extremists are stirring up our Negro population. It's just like, no, people have every reason to revolt. And so what if they're burning down shit? This system has completely failed them. Capitalism has completely failed them. Of course, they're going to be pissed off. And let's be real also, my neighborhood, in lower Manhattan, there's been tons of looting, and it's like brown and black kids. And it's just like, these kids are enculturated in consumer capitalism. Everything they see is about like getting luxury goods, like getting nice stuff. And before, it was like they might have dreams of that, but it was like, it was out of their grasp. Now, with complete economic collapse, their future before was pretty tenuous. It was probably going to be some crappy service sector job. Now they don't have any future. Now they're seeing their elder die. Let's not forget, African Americans are dying at 2.4 times the rate of white Americans. So they're seeing, their grandparents dying from infection. Their mothers and fathers and aunts and uncles have to go to their essential jobs and are dying. They've been essentially imprisoned at home for months. They went to crappy schools, and now, even if they can get online, it's probably just a complete and utter joke now. Not like they had great in-person schooling before. So of course there's going to be a social explosion, and people are also going to act out. There's this article in the New York Times, I think, that this quote from this guy summed it up so well. It was that he said, like, people are doing stuff they never dreamed they could do before in terms of the looting. And of course, if you don't think that kids are going to like want to loot, you've never been a kid, and you also don't know the reality of what it's like to be a working class, brown or black kid in a city. And the funny thing is, the person they quoted was himself a security guard, and was on top of that, he was looting as well. So, I mean, it's just like, look, if I was like 17-year-old, hell yeah, I'd be looting shit. I'd be burning down shit. Who wouldn't?
One of the interesting things to me, though, Arun, is that when you start insisting, all right, so white supremacists are infiltrating the protests, all right, provide me some evidence, and then this back and forth starts to happen. What happens is this sort of defensive posture goes up where it's almost like because you're demanding evidence as if you're siding with white supremacists. It's like, how dare you? It's like, what are you trying to do here? When you're saying, well, I'm a journalist and I want to separate fact from rumor.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, it is funny. Like, I get almost the same responses. People will come into the conversation. They'll put these lengthy comments making all these wild claims, and I'll just be like, "Can you send me some evidence?" And then they'll get like all huffy and be like, "Oh, I'm not going to do your work for you." I'm like, dude, you're the one who's making these wild, coming to me making these wild claims. Okay, don't get all pissy with me just because now I'm asking you to back it up, and you immediately start backpedaling, and they're like, well, there's stories I heard. And it's funny because someone sent me this really lengthy report, and you could tell it's from people who were like trying to do the right thing. And let's not uh, dance around the issue. There's so many white people who are confusing like allyship and therapy culture with like strategic organizing. Right. And so it's just like they want to affirm people of color. Right. So it's just like if someone tells them a story, it then it's like, I believe survivors, man. So it's just like, I believe you. People get swept up. People's memories are completely unreliable, especially in these moments. And there's also just absurd misinterpretations. Like, everyone's like probably seen the Umbrella Man videos in Minneapolis, where it's this guy who's dressed all in black. He's got a gas mask. He has an umbrella, and he's smashing windows at an auto store. And people are like, "What are you doing? What are you doing?" And he's like trying to get away from him. He tries to snatch the phone, and it's just like, "Oh, this is so suspicious." And it's just like, no, I've been in the middle of plenty of riots before. Usually they were police riots, but there was almost always like a significant black bloc or Antifa contingent there. And it's just like, yeah, if you're out there to like, because you want to smash it up and you want to like take it to capitalism, and it's just like, okay, I think that's generally a little juvenile, but I think what we're seeing now, hey, we can understand why so many people see it as justified. Interestingly, a Newsweek poll found 54% of the American public said burning down the Minneapolis precinct station was justified. A majority of Americans agree that burning down a police station is justified. So you can imagine, I have never seen so many people who have been like, sure, you know, loot all those luxury goods stores. Why
Yeah,
why the
totally.
hell not? I'm not going out and doing it. I'm not telling anyone to do it. I'm just explaining the psychology behind it as completely understandable. And so, and it kind of works these two ways, that you have a lot of white progressives who still don't see black and brown people as fully complex human beings. That one, you have these kids who they're young, they're full of hormones, they're full of rage, and they can do smart righteous stuff, and they can also do juvenile destructive stuff, right? And often in the same person within a few minutes of each other, right? This is a moment where everything starts to become possible. So it's very unpredictable, very chaotic. And then at the same time, this kind of fetishization, it's just like, I can tell you, it doesn't matter who you are, what your race is, what your class is. If you're in the middle of a riot, your memory becomes really notoriously unreliable, and that's what reporters do, is they hunt this stuff down, and they need verification. And so, because I've been reporting on the far right now for 5 years, I know most of the really good reporters who work at the national media outlets, like Guardian, like BuzzFeed, like HuffPo, or Southern Poverty Law Center or Political Research Associates, who are out in the streets looking for evidence of this. It would be a major scoop for any one of them to find that white nationalists are behind the violence. And let's make also a very important distinction here. Yes, white nationalists are out there, and we've got lots of evidence of this, right? We've got evidence of, all these Boogaloo boys. These are the ones who are like, promoting like the Civil War meme. A lot of them are LARPers, live action role players. So they show up in their Hawaiian shirts, they show up with all their guns and gear, and they take selfies and they post them. There's also a lot of shit posting going on. People are trying to incite stuff, or just troll the left, antagonize the left, or put out disinformation. And that's even without foreign and domestic intelligence agencies trying to basically create chaos as well. So yeah, just like this guy in Minneapolis did see with his eyes, three percenters and Proud Boys. Sure, we know they are showing up, but are they behind violence and shooting? We have lone wolves, right? So there's the guy with the bow and arrow. I believe that was what, San Diego. You have this guy in Omaha who killed a young black man. He was a Trump campaign volunteer, and he was allegedly a notorious racist and transphobic, and he's already been cleared of those charges. You had the Trump.
You have this guy who dressed up as a National Guard soldier with all the gear, who was turned in by people when they noticed he didn't have the standard issue
Mhm,
gun.
mhm.
So I mean, but what's that? I mean, some 28-year-old who dressed up in a
Right, and
uniform.
this is a thing. Like, we see a lot of lone wolf stuff. Like, my concern during the Trump years is, Trump is a stochastic terrorist. That means what he does is he amplifies through his rhetoric general level of white nationalist terrorism, and we've seen this. So stochastic terrorism
Yep.
means that no individual event is predictable, but the generalized trend is predictable. So we see kind of the background, or kind of like the number of terrorist incidents under him have increased dramatically. But what allows him to be like, absolve himself is just like, oh, I didn't, tell, Caesar Sayoc, the MAGA bomber, to send, bombs to CNN. I didn't tell Robert Bowers to go shoot up the Tree of Life synagogue and kill 11 people. I didn't tell Patrick Crusius to kill, I think 25 Hispanic people at the Walmart in El Paso. But they were all basing what they did on Trump's words. Like Patrick Crusius's manifesto, it sounded like a Trump campaign rally. Or, Robert Bowers, he was blaming HIAS, which is this Jewish refugee aid group, for bringing in refugees when Trump was ranting about the caravans in October of 2018 before the midterm election. And, on and on and on. Like, I've been tracking dozens of these cases, so you can't blame any particular one. It's these lone wolves. Similarly, we see white nationalists out there. We see these lone wolf attacks. What I've been worried about is more of organized pogroms. Now, in the last few days, we are starting to get like evidence of, like, so someone had sent me photos from Albuquerque, New Mexico, of a basically armed vigilant, gang of threepers. They're kind of like appointing themselves as like defenders of business. Um, there's also an incident in Oregon. Like, Oregon is a really goddamn racist state. Someone again sent me a news article where hundreds of locals, and this is more the problem, right? It becomes more this kind of like classic, 19th century racist mobs or 20th century racist white mobs, right? Tulsa, Oklahoma. The 99th anniversary was just a couple of days ago, a day or two ago, I believe, in early June. The destruction of Black Wall Street, where 300 African Americans were killed, and it was bombed by the U.S. Army Air Force, and the survivors were put into a concentration camp. This was a pogrom by the white citizens. So there's all these videos of these meatheads in Philadelphia, in Fishtown, which is this hardcore white, which I've spent time in, white working class neighborhoods, super racist, of all these meatheads walking around with baseball bats, and they actually went up to the cops to offer their support, to protect them from the Black Lives Matter thugs. And the cops are just like, we don't need your help. This is the other thing that people often don't get. And I would recommend, there's like a few people on the left who do really good work on policing. Christian Williams, Stuart, damn, is it Schaefer, I think, and Alex Vitale. They've all written books. They're all leftists who've written these scholarly works about policing. And they would all tell you the same thing. It's just like, police like their monopoly on the use of force. They're not going to give it up to these meatheads. Now, they'll overlook a lot of violence. They'll, especially if they're attacking the left, they'll turn a blind eye to it. There's also like documented cases in the last few years of like episodic collaboration, and of course, police force, white nationalists, explicit white nationalists often join police forces, and again, the cops don't really care about that. But the idea that they're going to let these white nationalists kind of on their turf is ridiculous, because they are very protective of their own turf, and they don't want anyone on it, including white nationalists, even when they're sympathetic to them. I've seen this going on when I visit Portland, like repeatedly. The cops here are very sympathetic to the like kind of fascist light Patriot Prayer and Proud Boys here, and they give them a lot of free reign, but they're not going to let them like engage in policing functions themselves.
Right. I agree with that. Although, some of the more troubling videos for me, at least, with regard to that issue, you saw in these, open up Michigan protests where these militia guys or wannabe militia guys, or maybe both, turned out with basically, burning the governor in effigy, holding up nooses, threatening to lynch the governor, and so forth. In that episode, you saw, and I mean, there's a video circulating on YouTube. You saw the local sheriff. I mean, an elected official who I suppose is probably one of the most prominent people in the county there, openly on the stage standing with them as if he is one of them, as if they are one and the same entity, basically saying these guys are the defenders of the Second Amendment and nobody's going to come and take away our Second Amendment. Now, I'm not suggesting that means that the militia people are doing policing functions. What I'm saying is that when the line becomes blurred in that way, and that becomes sort of a new normal, I do think that you begin to see, let's say, a very sort of permeable membrane between those two. Let's
Yeah,
call
yeah. And like after the Patrick Crusius murders, like I interviewed Alex Vitale about this, and you know, and Christian Williams both, and they both said the same thing. It's just like, look, this is kind of classic that the state, the feds just really turned a blind eye to far right violence until it crosses a line. With the left, they go after them much earlier, but if it the political heat becomes too much, they will eventually take action, right? So with the civil rights movement, the Mississippi Freedom Democratic summer, with the murder of Schwerner, Cheney, and Goodman, finally the FBI came in, right, and started like cracking down to a degree on the Klan murders, with Timothy McVeigh and the militia movement. After you blow up a federal building and kill, whatever it was, around 150 people, then finally the feds come in and crack down on the militia. Similarly, it's after Patrick Crusius where we finally see DHS and the FBI saying the number one threat is white nationalist extremists. And of course, in the last decade, or the last something like 15 years, I think it's like 110 murders by white nationalists and none by anarchists. But to Trump, the white nationalists are good people, which he tweeted out, and the anarchists are domestic terrorists, which of course is meaningless, but it does signify that there's going to be a lot more like FBI resources probably devoted to going after anarchists. And I will warn people: be very careful of what you say on social media. People are already getting indicted for shit they're putting up on social media. So it's just like, don't be an idiot, and say stuff on social media. Don't leave any digital footprints, because it doesn't matter, even like if it's legal what you're saying. If they have enough leeway, they'll try and go after you. But yeah, I mean, I think it's pretty clear. Like, I mean, sheriffs are also their own kind of special thing. Just the whole both mythology and kind of as an institution, they're elected. Every county has a sheriff. They have all this power. 83% of sheriffs are white men, so it is very much as kind of like fascistic, in terms of like race and gender and masculinity and this like violence and force. And yeah, and you see all these constitutional sheriffs, and it's just like, these guys are like violating the law, and you're meanwhile buddy buddy with them, and then peaceful protesters are getting shot in the face.
Right. They're all the graduates of the Arpaio School of Human
Yeah,
Rights
yeah, yeah,
Advocacy.
yeah, yeah.
Yeah, exactly. All right. Last couple of minutes that we have, I want to talk a little bit about food. I love it. You love it. Let's talk about it. Apocalypse Chow, cooking in end times. It's a lot of fun. You got this series going on Instagram. It really, I think, it's a lot of fun for a time when we're quarantined, when we're thinking about how do we continue to make food at home and keep it interesting and keep it fun when we're not able to go out in the way that we might normally do it, or we might not even be able to get all the ingredients we might normally get. Talk to me about Apocalypse Chow, why you're doing it, and how
Yeah,
it's going.
so I'm doing like a very different cooking show. So for folks who don't know, I'm actually a trained chef. I'm trained in classical French cuisine. I cook professionally in New York City in the white tablecloth restaurants. If anyone remembers Savoy, which was often called the Chez Panisse of the East. Chez Panisse is the Alice Waters groundbreaking restaurant in Berkeley, California. That's kind of considered to like be at the cutting edge of like the whole new wave of American cuisine, the California cuisine, which is this like nouvelle cuisine, light, fresh, seasonal. And she's considered to have helped redefine fine dining. Savoy, the chef operator there, Peter Hoffman, he played a similar role in New York City in terms of like really introducing like green market, fresh, locally produced food into the restaurant scene starting in the 1980s. And so I've been doing this cooking show where I do recipes, but I also do all this history and anthropology and science, like explaining, the backgrounds, because, this is actually, I mean, we could do a whole show about this. I mean, it's utterly fascinating. I was just stuffing my face with some homemade granola because we've been talking so long and I needed some food. I have never done anything like this in my life. for 3 months now, every single morsel of food I have eaten has been made in the home, right? And we'll still go shopping, or now we're getting food delivery, something I never said I would do in my life, because I want to go pick my own fruits and vegetables. But there's also a realization, well, supermarkets are potentially hot spots of infection. And if you're only going shopping, like I was only going shopping every 2 weeks, and I'd end up spending like an hour and a half in the supermarket because we needed so much shit. And it's just like, if you're having every single bit of food, right? And it's just like, I'm sure I'm like a lot of people, like, my drinking's gone up a little in the last few months. Like, it's a nice way to take the edge off at night. You're buying a lot of crap. And so, yeah, maybe sometimes we'll have like ramen or mac and cheese, but I really don't like the taste of them. And the thing is, we've been deprived of so much that the last thing I want to start doing is depriving myself of good food. And I love restaurants, but I can no longer go out. And so I've got like, years of professional cooking skill, and then decades of doing it in the house, and including professional catering, and, teaching myself all sorts of stuff. And I liken it to being like a studio musician, like, these veteran studio musicians who I know, like, they can pick up all, guitar players who can pick up all sorts of different types of string instruments and start playing them, because they know different genres, they know different techniques. And so, like, I can pick up new cuisines. And so, like, I'm like, you start to get bored of having the same thing. And I'm like, oh, okay, I'll make like a Thai green curry from scratch. Or like, I started making tortillas from scratch, because like, I really did like supermarket tortillas. And when we went down to Mexico for a week, to Brownsville, Texas, and then on the Mexico side, Matamoros, we were eating this delicious Mexican food, including homemade tortillas. And I'm like, damn, these tortillas are good. And so I'm like, I bet you they're not too hard to make, because I make my own chapatis and naan and roti, all the time. And so I started making, and I'm like, wow, these are so much better than the store-bought tortillas. But now it's just like, if I want something, I have to make it. And it's just like, oh my God, everything is such a pain in the ass now. So it's just like, if I want more tortillas, I got to make more tortillas. If I want granola, I got to make more granola. If I want, hey, I'm like, I made like real beef bourguignon recently. And it's just like absolutely delicious. But it's a lot of work, and it had to like cook for 8 hours. And luckily I made 2 gallons, and so like I packed my freezer. But it's just like this one. I've read like hundreds of books in the last few years about food, history of food, anthropology, especially about American cuisine. And there's this one history, where it's covering like 19th century, and it's talking about just all the work that women would have to do, and they were basically chained to their stoves, especially those who worked on the kind of the homesteads, who just like cooking themselves to death. And one of the authors was talking about, like how the process for making potted meats. Now you'll still see cans of potted meat. This used to be a big thing in pre-industrial age, where you take meats, you cook them down, you basically grind them, and then you pack them in little crock pots, and you cover them with fat, because they could last for months that way. And just like everything is just all this manual labor. And the author is just like, describing it and saying, how much of a bother this was. And then the author says in the side, it's just like, well, everything was a bother in those days. And so for the last 3 months, I've been kind of living this, right now I have sourdough bread going, because it's just like, we get sliced bread, right? But if you want like some decent, artisanal bread, I'm not, before I would shop at like, probably 15 or 20 different stores, if I want like, to make like some Japanese food, I'm going to the Japanese supermarket. If I want Korean food, I'm going to the Korean supermarket, for Indian food, and on and on. Or I'm going to this specialty store or that specialty store. Now, maybe I'll go to one store like 2 times in a month. And even that I've been cutting back on. So, it means you end up doing without a lot of stuff, or you have to make it yourself. And so it's really, to me, kind of fascinating because we're kind of living almost this like all these different ages of our lives, right? In terms of like, we're now much more conscious about food waste, right? Before it's just like, oh, that broccoli is kind of getting yellow. Before we would throw it out. And now it's just like, well, maybe just trim it a little because the longer you make it last, it means the less often you have to get groceries. You have to take the risk. And this, of course, used to be the story for humanity that going out to get your own food, especially hunter and gatherers, was a risky endeavor. Or, the fact that you're now eating all your leftovers, even when they're starting to go off a little. Like my parents would do that in their whole generation. My parents grew up in India, but kind of that older generation who the grandparents went through the Great Depression. They handed down this whole ethos of you don't waste anything. Or like another thing I found myself doing is like now for the first time ever, like I'm saving bottles, I'm saving plastic bags, not because of some neuroses, but it's just like, oh, I can actually use this for stuff like you know I've been worried like a lot of people about disruptions in the food supply chain. So now I've got like 50 pounds of rice and 40 pounds of flour. And it's just like, oh, where the hell do I store all this stuff? So, it's definitely, it feels like, I'm living like these periods from like the 1970s, the 1930s, the 1880s, even, kind of like ancient times, like, making all the various flatbreads, trying to figure out how do I store stuff, like how do I keep potatoes and onions around for like a month or more, or having like, different types of squash that is almost like, hey, these will last a couple of months, and it becomes like now you're trying to manage all these different food supplies, and you have to think like, oh, I need to take like this meat out of the freezer like a couple days in advance, even though we got food in the fridge, we're going to be running out. And it's definitely a very different way of relating to food than we're used to in the past. And I think it's useful in a lot of ways because it makes us think of our interconnectedness, and it also makes us realize how much we waste.
Absolutely. And I think that part of what I really like about Apocalypse Chow and the episodes that I've watched is that it's not just that you're talking about all of these issues and that you do provide a quick snapshot of some of the history of some of the items that you're talking about, where it comes from, maybe, what it symbolizes or whatever. But it's also that what you're really doing ultimately is you're making something fun that for a lot of us has become a daily obstacle. We like cooking at home. We like authentic, home food, but we don't like necessarily being forced into doing it every single day with no other option. And so when I watch your show, I'm like, oh, fuck yeah, I could make some Korean food. Let's do that.
Yeah, yeah,
You know
yeah.
what
I
I
mean,
mean?
it is a chore, but it is fun also. And it's also, a great, loving, nurturing thing you can do for the people around you. And this is why, like, sure, I realize I can get all sorts of, like, we could order tons of processed food, but it's just like, you know what? It's just like, I can't go out, hang out at bars. I can't go to restaurants. I can't see live music. I can't, I can't go to protests. I'm not going to these protests because I don't want to catch coronavirus. I mean, I kind of have been going out and like peering from the edges, from a couple hundred yards away, and it's very much young people, overwhelmingly young people, because they're much more able to take this risk than I am. But when you get deprived of so much, you want to still have like some pleasure in your life, and so that's why, like, I think it's important to be able to still have and enjoy good food.
Absolutely. Well, I'm glad I kept this conversation to the 40 minutes that I promised you. It's an hour and 20 in this recording. But check out Apocalypse Chow on Instagram. Follow Arun there. Follow Arun on Twitter. Arun Indy, ARUNINDY. You can also find his work on Counterpunch as well as all the other places that he's publishing. Arun, thanks again as always for your work and for coming and talking with us.
Thank you. Thanks for having me on.
Listeners, thank you as always, and we'll chat again next week.